Sometimes it's what you give that gives you the most. Or maybe it's the lasers! Yes, stand back or face the fury of Metal Gunzerbot with his rapid fists of steel fury. No alien scum can stand in his way. And if that doesn't do the trick, then prepare to face the electric wrath of Shock Zorbatron! And if you're still coming back for more, then the cosmic blunt force of Goldomni Wheels will teach you a lesson that you won't soon forget. But where is this universal struggle between good and evil taking place? Closer than you may think, right in Alex's bedroom. Alex loved his robots. He'd almost collected the whole set. He battled with them in the morning, played the official video game in the evening, and dreamed about them at night. It was sometimes a bit difficult to get Alex's attention because he always had his head in the clouds. Alex? Alex? Alex! Was he paying attention? No. Chris, meanwhile, had been planning a special club activity all week. That night there was going to be a big carnival in town, but there were some kids that weren't going to get to go. Remy and Franny weren't allowed to go to the carnival because their parents didn't have enough money, and they were too small for most of the rides anyway. So Chris and Diana decided to make their own carnival for them and have it right in their backyard. Chris was going to be in charge of setting up some games for the kids to play, and Diana was going to make prizes for them to win. And Alex was going to be in charge of... Alex? Alex? Alex! Was he finally paying attention? No. They asked their neighbor Joe to help with the carnival. Joe volunteered to cater the event with hot dogs and hamburgers. Excellent. They even asked their new friend Gum to help by providing some muscle power for the rides. Chris was busy setting up the games, like this fishing game, where Remy and Franny could cast a fishing line over a wall and catch a prize, and Diana was busy making prizes for it. She'd already made a whole set of sparkly, colorful crosses. Some of them even glowed in the dark. And Alex was busy working on... Alex? Alex! Maybe later. Chris was frustrated with Alex sometimes. Chris tried to teach him about God and about loving others, but Alex was sometimes too busy playing with his robots. He was always thinking about his toys and about collecting more toys, but Chris still included him in all of their club activities, even when Alex's brain was drifting in outer space. Evening finally came, and it was time for their carnival. Remy and Franny were very excited. Alex arrived on the scene with his wagon of robots to watch the event. He was more interested in playing than helping, but when he saw how much work Chris and Diana had done, he felt bad that he'd been so selfish. While Chris and Diana had been thinking about others, Alex had just been thinking about himself. But it seemed too late to help now. Joe was cooking up hamburgers for the kids, Gum was pulling Franny around in a cardboard box, and Remy was playing the fishing game. Remy's parents didn't have enough money to buy him any toys, so he was really enjoying catching prizes with his fishing line. Pretty soon Remy had already won 3 sparkly crosses, but he wanted to keep playing anyway. Diana soon realized that all she'd made were sparkly crosses, and she didn't have any new prizes for Remy to catch. They tried to tell Remy that he might have to go play something else for a while because there weren't any new prizes for him. But suddenly, Remy caught something. They were all amazed when up from behind the wall came a Metal Gunzerbot. Remy was shocked. And after that, he caught a Shock Zorbatron. And after that, a Goldomni Wheels. It was the happiest day of Remy's life. After the carnival was over, Chris and Diana weren't sure what to say. Alex was a little sad that he'd given away his robots, but felt very good that he'd made someone else so happy. The only problem was that Diana didn't know what to do with the rest of her sparkly, colorful crosses. That night, Alex slept better than he'd ever slept before. He'd always spent so much time trying to collect so much stuff, but that day he realized that sometimes it's what you give that gives you the most. Sometimes all you have to do is keep praying for your sandwich. Mr. Buckle. He was the meanest and grumpiest old man in town. And to top it off, he had one of the meanest dogs in town, too. Not many people talked to Mr. Buckle, except for Chris. You see, a while back, Chris decided to make it part of his weekly routine to play a game of chess with Mr. Buckle every Friday. Because even though Mr. Buckle seemed grumpy, Chris knew he was probably very lonely, too. So every Friday, Chris would go to Mr. Buckle's house for a game of chess. And every time he went, he would take a sandwich to eat before their game started. Chris always said a prayer before eating his sandwich, even though Mr. Buckle thought it was silly. Mr. Buckle had no room in his life for prayer. He had his grumpy old friends, his grumpy old family, his grumpy old dog, and his grumpy old money. And with all that stuff, who needed to pray? After Chris ate his sandwich, they would play chess. Chris would always lose. Mr. Buckle would laugh at him. And then... And that's the way it would go. By the time the next week rolled around, Chris really didn't want to go back in. But he did. He got out his sandwich and said a prayer. Mr. Buckle made fun of him as usual. They played chess. Chris lost. Mr. Buckle laughed. And... The next time Chris considered just not saying a prayer. At least then he wouldn't get laughed at. But no, Chris wanted to say a prayer, even if Mr. Buckle made fun of him. Lost again? The next week Chris really didn't want to go back in. But he did. This time Mr. Buckle's grumpy old friends were there. Chris got out his sandwich and said a prayer to tell God thank you. Mr. Buckle's friends thought it was amusing. Chris and Mr. Buckle played their game. Chris lost. Everyone laughed. And... Before Chris knew it, another week had gone by and it was that time again. By now Chris felt very discouraged and didn't feel like he was making a difference at all. Mr. Buckle wasn't going to change. Chris started to just turn around and leave, but he stopped and prayed that God would give him strength. Chris turned and went inside. Mr. Buckle seemed different this time. He'd had a very bad week and was very sad. Mr. Buckle's friends didn't like him when he was sad, so they weren't there. His family wasn't there for him either. They were too busy with other things. And Mr. Buckle's money couldn't make him feel any better either. He had no one, and Chris saw how lonely he really was. Chris took out his sandwich and said a prayer. Mr. Buckle didn't make fun of him this time. In fact, Mr. Buckle closed his eyes too. All of those other weeks, Chris's visit hadn't meant anything to him, but today it meant everything. Chris was there after everyone else had left, and Mr. Buckle was starting to learn that God would always be there too. As for Chris, he was starting to learn that sometimes all you have to do is keep praying for your sandwich.